Meryl Streep stepped out of a modest black sedan, her simple navy blue dress flowing gently in the evening breeze. No designer name prominently displayed, no excessive sparkle to catch the light. Just elegant simplicity that perfectly complemented her graceful demeanor. The Metropolitan Museum of Art stood before her, transformed tonight into the venue for New York's most exclusive annual charity gala. As she approached the grand entrance, flashbulbs erupted for other arriving celebrities, those who had coordinated their arrivals with the press. Meryl simply smiled at the doorman and walked in without fanfare. She wasn't here for the cameras. She was here for the cause, educational opportunities for underprivileged children, something she had quietly supported for decades. Inside, the museum's grand hall had been transformed into a dazzling wonderland. Crystal chandeliers hung from impossibly high ceilings, their light dancing off gold-plated centerpieces, and the jewels adorning New York's elite. The air carried the scent of exotic flowers arranged in towering displays and the subtle notes of expensive perfumes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "My goodness, look who decided to attend," came a voice dripping with false sweetness. Victoria Hamilton, draped in a blinding gold Versace gown adorned with actual diamonds sewn into the fabric, lifted her champagne glass slightly. "I thought..." The invitation specified formal attire. Beside her, Diana Blackwood suppressed a laugh behind her hand, the enormous emerald on her finger catching the light. Perhaps she thought this was the rehearsal dinner, she whispered loudly enough to be heard by those nearby. Meryl caught their comments but simply smiled to herself. She knew these types all too well, women who measured worth by designer labels and social connections rather than character or contribution. "Actually, I believe the invitation specified black tie, not costume ball," Meryl murmured to herself as she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, who gave her a subtle smile of recognition. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she watched Meryl move through the crowd. Who invited her anyway? Certainly not in that dress. It's practically off the rack. Apparently, Robert insisted on some authentic talent this year, Diana replied with air quotes, though I'm not sure why he'd choose someone whose last relevant role was years ago. What Victoria and Diana didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know from their bubble of social climbing and status symbols, was that Robert De Niro had personally called Meryl 3 weeks ago. "We need you there," he had said simply. "This year's going to be different." As Meryl made her way deeper into the gala, she noticed the evaluative glances, the subtle shifts in posture as people determined whether she was important enough to warrant their attention. Most turned away, gravitating toward the louder, more ostentatious guests whose social media followings could boost their own visibility. Victoria made her way to the event coordinator, whispering urgently while glancing back at Meryl. "Rebecca, there must have been a mistake with the seating chart. Meryl Streep cannot possibly be at table 3. That's where the Whitmore Foundation people are sitting." Rebecca, clipboard in hand, looked confused. But Mr. De Niro specifically requested. "Robert has too much on his mind tonight to worry about seating arrangements," Victoria interrupted. "Trust me, it would be embarrassing for everyone. Table 12 would be much more appropriate." Table 12, of course, was tucked near the kitchen entrance, typically reserved for staff and last-minute additions. Across the room, Robert De Niro. Nero entered through a side door, immediately surrounded by patrons eager to be seen with the host. He scanned the room, looking for someone specific, but was quickly pulled into conversation with the mayor. Meanwhile, Diana had positioned herself strategically next to Meryl at the bar. "That's a comfortable-looking dress," she said, eyeing Meryl's attire. "So refreshing to see someone not trying too hard." Meryl smiled warmly, unbothered. "Thank you. I've always believed that the best outfit is one you don't have to think about once it's on." Diana blinked, momentarily thrown by Meryl's genuine response. "Well, some of us put thought into respecting the occasion," she recovered, gesturing to her own elaborate gown. "After all, we're here to raise significant money." We?" Meryl asked, her eyes twinkling. "I thought we were here to support children's education." Before Diana could respond, Victoria appeared, triumphant. "Meryl, darling, there seems to have been a mix-up with the seating. You've been moved to table 12. Much cozier there, away. From all the boring foundation talk, Meryl raised an eyebrow but nodded. How thoughtful. As Victoria led her away, she caught Robert's eye across the room. He frowned slightly, noticing something was amiss, but was pulled away by another donor before he could intervene. "You know," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet as they approached. "The isolated table. Not everyone can handle these high-profile events. The expectations, the connections one needs to maintain, it's really a skill developed over time." "Indeed," Meryl responded, taking her seat at the nearly empty table. "Some spend a lifetime perfecting it and still miss the point entirely." Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment. "Enjoy your evening," she said, before gliding away to rejoin. "Diana, can you believe that dress?" Victoria whispered as they watched from across the room. "And not a single piece of notable jewelry. It's like she's not even trying. Did you see how easily she accepted being relegated to the back? That's someone who knows her relevance has faded," Diana replied. What these women didn't know, what they would soon discover to their tremendous embarrassment, was that Meryl Streep wasn't just another guest at this charity gala. She was its silent guardian, having anonymously donated millions to the Educational Foundation over the past 15 years. And tonight, Robert De Niro planned to finally reveal the identity of their mysterious benefactor to inspire others. Victoria and Diana would soon learn they had just humiliated the woman who would be standing at the podium within the hour. The woman whose contribution had single-handedly kept this foundation running through economic downturns. The woman who had personally funded scholarships for over 2,000 underprivileged children. But for now, Meryl simply sipped her champagne and observed the choreographed social dance around her, secure in the knowledge that true impact rarely comes with sequins and flashbulbs. Seated at table 12, Meryl observed the room with quiet interest. Despite being relegated to this isolated corner, she found herself rather enjoying the unfiltered view of the gala's social dynamics. The charity event was supposedly about educational funding, yet conversations around the room rarely touched on the children who would benefit. Instead, discussions revolved around vacation homes, recent acquisitions, and who was wearing what. A young waiter approached her table, carrying a tray of canapes. "Ms. Streep," he whispered, his voice filled with admiration. "It's an honor. I'm studying film at NYU because of your work in Sophie's Choice." Meryl smiled warmly. "That's lovely to hear. What's your name?" "Marcus," he replied, surprised she'd asked. "Well, Marcus, keep studying. The world needs more thoughtful storytellers." From across the room, Victoria observed the interaction with narrowed eyes. "Look, at her trying to win over the staff," she commented to Diana. "How desperate." Diana nodded, sipping her third glass of champagne. "Shall we go welcome her properly? She looks so alone over there." Victoria's ruby-painted lips curved into a smile. "We absolutely should. It's only polite." As they glided across the marble floor, heads turned to admire Victoria's designer gown, which had reportedly cost as much as a small apartment in Manhattan. They approached Meryl's table with practiced smiles, the kind reserved for those they considered beneath their social standing. "Meryl, darling," Victoria purred, uninvited as she took a seat beside her. "We simply couldn't let you sit here all alone. It's positively criminal." "How thoughtful," Meryl replied, her eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. Diana joined them, arranging her emerald gown precisely around her chair. "I was just telling Victoria how brave you are." Meryl raised an eyebrow. "Brave? To attend an event like this," Diana clarified, gesturing around the opulent room. "In your position, with the industry being so youth-focused these days." Meryl took a measured sip of her water. "I find there's always room for substance, but perhaps that's just my perspective." Victoria's smile tightened imperceptibly. "Speaking of substance, have you met Alexander Rhodes? He's just taken over the Whitmore Foundation, young but absolutely brilliant." "I haven't had the pleasure," Meryl replied. "Oh, we must introduce you, though he's terribly busy tonight with the serious donors," Victoria said, emphasizing the word serious. "Perhaps at the next event if you attend." Meryl simply smiled, unbothered. "I look forward to it." Just then, Robert De Niro appeared at the edge of the ballroom, scanning the tables. His brow furrowed when he spotted Meryl in the far corner. He began making his way through the crowd, but was intercepted by a group of eager board members. "Tell me, Meryl," Diana leaned in conspiratorially, "what brings you to this particular event? I wasn't aware you had connections to educational charities." Before Meryl could answer, Victoria added, "Most celebrities choose causes that align with their public image. Education seems so administrative for someone in film." Meryl set down her glass. "I believe all children deserve access to quality education, regardless of their circumstances. The Foundation's work speaks for itself." "How commendable," Victoria said, her tone suggesting anything but admiration, though some might say real impact requires more than just attendance at galas. "I couldn't agree more," Meryl replied, her voice steady and warm. Victoria, thrown by Meryl's consistent grace, shifted tactics. "We're heading over to speak with the Morgans. They've just pledged $2 million to the new science program. Would you care to join us?" The invitation was extended with the clear expectation of refusal. "Thank you, but I'm quite comfortable here," Meryl answered. "Don't let me keep you from your networking." As Victoria and Diana departed, their whispers barely concealed, Meryl noticed a woman at a nearby table watching the interaction with interest. Emma Thompson, dressed in a tasteful but understated gown similar to Meryl's, gave her a subtle nod of recognition. Meanwhile, Victoria was already working the room, strategically drawing influential guests away from Meryl's orbit. "Alexander, you simply must meet the Morgans. They're considering a significant donation to the STEM initiative," she said loudly enough for Meryl to hear, deliberately excluding her from the introduction. The room had begun to take sides, with most gravitating toward Victoria's sphere of influence, where champagne flowed more freely and social currency was exchanged like poker chips. A few, however, seemed uncomfortable with the obvious exclusion tactics. Marcus, the young waiter, returned to Meryl's table. "Can I get you anything else, Ms. Streep?" "I'm fine, thank you, Marcus," she replied. Then, noticing his hesitation, added, "Was there something else?" He lowered his voice. "I just wanted to say, not everyone here is like them." He nodded discreetly toward Victoria and Diana. Meryl's expression softened. "I know. The quiet ones often make the most difference." Across the room, Robert finally broke free from his conversation and made a beeline for Meryl's table, only to be intercepted by Victoria. "Robert, darling," she cooed, linking her arm through his. "The governor was just asking about you. You simply can't keep him waiting." Robert frowned. "I need to speak with Meryl first. There's been a mix-up with—" "The governor," Victoria insisted, steering him away. "The funding for next year's program depends on it. Meryl is fine where she is." As the evening progressed, the isolation became more pronounced. Guests who might have approached Meryl reconsidered after seeing Victoria's not-so-subtle social cues. Diana continued to circulate, dropping carefully crafted comments. "Such a shame when legends can't gracefully step back from the spotlight." Robert invited her out of respect for her past contributions to film, I suppose. "It's admirable, really, showing up despite not being part of this circle." Emma Thompson, having observed enough, finally stood and began making her way toward Meryl's table. Before she could arrive, however, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling dinner was about to be served. Victoria returned to her prime table at the front, smiling triumphantly at Diana. "Perfect timing. Now she'll be isolated through the entire meal." What Victoria didn't notice was the brief exchange between Robert and the event coordinator, a hurried conversation that ended with the coordinator making notes on her tablet, glancing toward Meryl with new understanding. The first course was served as the Foundation's introductory video began playing on large screens throughout the ballroom. As images of children whose lives had been changed by educational opportunities filled the screens, Meryl watched with genuine interest, perhaps the only person in the room more focused on the cause than the social hierarchy. Little did Victoria and Diana know their carefully orchestrated social gambit was about to spectacularly backfire. The night was still young, and Robert De Niro hadn't forgotten his purpose. Neither had Meryl Streep. The soft chime of crystal announced dinner service. A staff glided between tables with practiced precision. At the front of the ballroom, Victoria Hamilton surveyed her domain with satisfaction. Her manipulation of the seating chart had been a masterpiece of social engineering, placing donors next to potential business partners, arranging politicians, beside influencers who could amplify their messages, and most importantly, ensuring Meryl Streep remained isolated at table 12. "The seating arrangement is perfect," Diana whispered, taking her place beside Victoria at the prime table directly in front of the stage. "Everyone who matters is properly positioned." Victoria smiled, adjusting her diamond bracelet. Naturally, these events require a certain understanding of social dynamics. From her table near the kitchen doors, Meryl watched the elaborate dance of New York's elite with quiet amusement. The distant hum of kitchen activity occasionally drowned out the pretentious conversations floating around the room, which she found oddly refreshing. "Ms. Streep?" A hesitant voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Rebecca, the event coordinator, clutching her tablet nervously. "I'm terribly sorry about the mix-up with your seating. Mr. De Niro is quite upset about it." Meryl waved away the concern. "It's perfectly fine, Rebecca. Don't worry about it. But you should be at table 1 with Mr. De Niro and the foundation." "Directors," Rebecca insisted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Ms. Hamilton assured me she had your approval for the change." "Did she now?" Meryl's eyes twinkled. "How thoughtful of her to speak on my behalf." Rebecca looked distressed. "I can fix this immediately. We can—" "Leave it," Meryl said gently. "The evening is underway, and I'd rather not create a disruption. Table 12 suits me fine." Rebecca appeared unconvinced, but nodded reluctantly. "If you're certain—" "I am." "But Rebecca," Meryl added as the coordinator turned to leave, "I would appreciate it if you could ensure Mr. De Niro knows I'm looking forward to speaking with him after dinner." Across the room, Victoria observed the exchange with narrowed eyes. "What is Rebecca doing at her table?" she hissed to Diana. "Probably apologizing for the subpar seating," Diana replied with a smirk. How embarrassing for Meryl, but Victoria wasn't convinced. Something in Rebecca's body language suggested concern rather than apology. She excused herself and intercepted Rebecca as she returned to her station. "Rebecca, darling," Victoria purred, "is everything all right? You seemed quite intense with Meryl Streep just now." Rebecca hesitated. "Everything's fine, Miss Hamilton. Just checking on all the guests." "Of course you are. That's why you're so good at your job," Victoria said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "Although I can't help noticing you spent considerably more time at her table than with our major donors. I was just ensuring everyone is comfortable naturally." Victoria placed a manicured hand on Rebecca's arm. "Though I'm curious, did Robert happen to ask about the seating arrangements?" A flash of discomfort crossed Rebecca's face. "Mr. De Niro did mention he was surprised by some of the placements." Victoria's grip tightened slightly. "I trust you explained that I, personally, oversaw the arrangements to maximize the evening's fundraising potential." Rebecca faltered under Victoria's intensity. "Wonderful," Victoria concluded, releasing her arm. "Now, the Morgans at table 3 need their special dietary requests confirmed. Would you see to that immediately? We wouldn't want to disappoint our 7-figure donors." As Rebecca hurried away, Victoria returned to her table, a new tension in her shoulders. She needed to neutralize any potential issues before they developed. Robert's influence in this circle was considerable. If he took issue with Meryl's treatment, it could reflect poorly on Victoria. Meanwhile, at table 12, Meryl found herself joined by unexpected company. A middle-aged couple hesitantly approached, introducing themselves as Richard and Elizabeth. "Connolly, we hope you don't mind," Elizabeth said, taking one of the empty seats. "Our assigned table is rather overwhelming." Richard nodded in agreement. "Too many people talking about their summer homes and not enough about why we're actually here." Meryl smiled genuinely for the first time that evening. "Please join me. It's refreshing to have real conversation." The Connollys, it turned out, were former educators who had started a small foundation providing arts education in underserved communities. They spoke passionately about their work, asking thoughtful questions about Meryl's interest in educational causes, without a hint of the social posturing that dominated the other tables. From her vantage point, Victoria watched this development with growing irritation. "What are the Connollys doing?" she whispered to Diana. They're supposed to be at table 7 with the tech investors. Diana squinted across the room. They appear to be enjoying themselves, she responded, sounding almost surprised. How unexpected. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line. The Connollys weren't major players in her social circle, but they were respected for their integrity and genuine philanthropy. Their apparent preference for Meryl's company sent the wrong message. This is getting out of hand, Victoria muttered, reaching for her clutch. Time for a course correction. She discreetly typed out a text message, then returned to her salmon appetizer with forced calm. Within minutes, a waiter appeared at table 12, leaning down to whisper something to the Connollys. They looked confused, then, apologetically, explained to Meryl that they were needed elsewhere before reluctantly departing. Once again alone, Meryl sighed softly, watching as the Connollys were directed to yet another table, not their original assignment, but one equally distant from her own. The message was clear. Isolation was the intended strategy. Robert De Niro, seated at the head table, continued to cast concerned glances in Meryl's direction. Each time he appeared ready to stand, someone, usually Victoria or one of her allies, would engage him in conversation, effectively anchoring him in place. His growing frustration was evident in the tight set of his jaw. Emma Thompson, observing from table 5, had seen enough. With deliberate casualness, she rose and made her way to the ladies' room, taking a path that led directly past table 12. This seating arrangement is absurd, she commented quietly as she passed Meryl's table, not breaking her stride. Robert's furious. Hold tight. As the first course was cleared away, Victoria stood and made her way to the small podium positioned at the side of the stage. With practiced charm, she tapped the microphone. Before we continue with our wonderful dinner, I wanted to take a moment to personally thank everyone for their extraordinary generosity tonight, she announced, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. Especially our Platinum Circle. Donors seated at tables 1 through 5. Your commitment to education is truly inspiring. Her gaze deliberately swept across the front tables, conspicuously avoiding the back of the room where Meryl sat. The message was unmistakable. Importance was measured by proximity to the stage, and table 12 didn't even merit acknowledgement. What Victoria didn't notice, however, was Robert De Niro quietly speaking with the technical director near the back of the stage, or the way the director's eyes widened as he glanced toward Meryl Streep. As Victoria concluded her impromptu speech to polite applause, Meryl simply sipped her water, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The night was young, and patience had always been one of her greatest strengths. The main course arrived with theatrical flair, servers unveiling silver domes in perfect synchronization to reveal expertly plated seafood and filet mignon. The choreographed service momentarily distracted from the social undercurrents flowing through the ballroom. But Victoria Hamilton was not one to rest on her accomplishments. "Diana," she whispered, leaning close to her companion, "we need to ensure everyone understands the hierarchy here. Meryl's quiet dignity act is starting to attract attention." Diana nodded, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "What did you have in mind?" Victoria's eyes gleamed with calculated purpose, a little context for those who might be confused about why she's really here. With practiced casualness, Victoria rose from her chair and began circulating among the front tables. To observers, she appeared to be graciously checking on important guests. In reality, she was sowing seeds. "Such a shame about Meryl," she murmured to the Silicon Valley couple at table 3. Robert invited her out of obligation. Apparently, she's been pestering his office about a role. At table 4, she offered a different version. "Between us, Meryl's foundation is struggling. She's here hoping to secure some donors of her own." By the time Victoria returned to her seat, the whispers had taken on a life of their own, traveling table to table in hushed tones and meaningful glances. From her isolated position, Meryl couldn't hear the specific comments, but she recognized the pattern of behavior. The quick glances in her direction, followed by whispered conversations behind hands or menus. The social temperature of the room had shifted perceptibly. Marcus, the young waiter who had earlier expressed his admiration, appeared visibly uncomfortable as he served her main course. "Is everything all right?" Meryl asked gently. He hesitated, then spoke quietly while arranging her silverware. "People are saying things is about why you're here. It's not right." "For that's very kind of you to be concerned," Meryl replied, her voice steady. "But rumors have never bothered me much. They're saying you're desperate for work, or that you're only here because Mr. De Niro felt sorry for you," Marcus continued, indignation coloring his voice. "I know it's not true," Meryl smiled. "The wonderful thing about untruths, Marcus, is that they eventually collapse under their own weight." Across the room, Emma Thompson observed the spreading whispers with growing irritation. Unlike most guests, she had known Meryl for decades and understood exactly how absurd these insinuations were. More importantly, she knew something Victoria Hamilton didn't: Meryl's actual connection to this charity. Emma caught Meryl's eye across the room and gave a small shake of her head, communicating her disgust with the situation. Then she deliberately turned to her table mates and began speaking, animatedly, clearly countering the narrative Victoria had been spreading. Victoria noticed this resistance immediately. "Emma Thompson is becoming a problem," she hissed to Diana. "She always was the difficult type," Diana replied, too principled for her own good. Victoria's gaze hardened. "We need to isolate her as well. Spread word that she's been difficult. With the foundation staff, demanding special treatment, the usual." Diana nodded and rose gracefully, moving to carry out her assignment. The systematic character assassination continued to spread through the ballroom with practiced efficiency. Robert, De Niro, still trapped in conversation with major donors at the head table, had noticed the shifting atmosphere. His attempts to extricate himself grew more determined, but the carefully orchestrated social barriers held firm. Meanwhile, Victoria decided to escalate matters directly. With calculated precision, she made her way to Meryl's table, Diana following. Closely behind, "Meryl, darling," Victoria said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "I wanted to check that you're comfortable. It must be so difficult attending these events when one is between projects." Meryl looked up calmly. "I'm quite comfortable, thank you, Victoria." "We so admire your courage," Diana added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Many would find it overwhelming to attend such high-profile gatherings without being well relevant to the current conversation." Around them, conversations quieted as people strained to hear the exchange. Victoria had purposefully timed this confrontation to coincide with a natural lull in the dinner service. "The only real currency in this room is contribution," Meryl responded evenly. "To the cause, not to the conversation." Victoria's smile tightened. "How philosophical. Though I imagine actual currency helps as well, something that can be challenging. When one star has dimmed." The comment hung in the air, its cruelty unmistakable. Several nearby guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Victoria's social power was too entrenched, the risk of crossing her too great. Meryl simply held Victoria's gaze, neither retreating nor escalating. "Is there something specific you needed, Victoria? Or did you just come to demonstrate your concern?" Before Victoria could respond, Rebecca, the event coordinator, approached hurriedly. "Ms. Hamilton, there's an urgent matter requiring your attention regarding the auction items." Victoria hesitated, clearly reluctant to end the confrontation. But the mention of the auction, featuring items she had personally secured, pulled her away. "We'll continue our chat later, Meryl. Do try to enjoy the evening despite everything." With a final pointed glance, she followed Rebecca toward the exhibition area. As Victoria departed, Meryl noticed Robert finally breaking free from his conversation, determination written across his features as he began making his way toward her table. Before he could arrive, however, Victoria intercepted him, gesturing urgently about some apparent crisis with the auction. Diana, left behind at Meryl's table, leaned in conspiratorially. "You know, Meryl, there's no shame in acknowledging when it's time to step back gracefully. Not everyone can maintain relevance indefinitely." Meryl took a deliberate sip of her wine. "Relevance is an interesting concept, Diana. Some measure it in flashbulbs and gossip columns, others in lasting impact." Diana's smile faltered slightly. "Well, we all have our delusions to comfort us, don't we?" "Indeed," Meryl replied simply. Diana returned to her table. Meryl observed the room with clear eyes. The damage was spreading. People who might have approached her earlier now deliberately avoided her gaze. The isolation was nearly complete. Emma Thompson, however, had managed to gather a small resistance at her table. Though too far away for conversation, she raised her glass to Meryl in a deliberate toast, several others at her table following. Suit. It was a small gesture of solidarity, but significant in the hostile environment Victoria had created. As the dessert course approached, Meryl overheard a fragment of conversation between Victoria and the event technical director near the stage. Absolutely must change the presentation order, Victoria was insisting. Robert's section should come before the major donor acknowledgement, not after. The technical director looked confused, but Mr. De Niro specifically requested, "Robert is overwhelmed with hosting duties," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Trust me, this adjustment will make everything flow much more smoothly." Meryl's interest was piqued. What was Victoria so determined to rearrange? And why did it matter so much? The answers would soon become clear, as the lights began to dim for the evening's main presentation. What Victoria Hamilton didn't realize was that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to face an unexpected gust of truth. The dessert course arrived, delicate ramekins of creme brulee with gold leaf garnish, as the evening's program edged toward its most significant moment. Guests tapped spoons against caramelized sugar, while the technical crew made final adjustments to the lighting and sound systems for the upcoming presentations. Meryl, still isolated at table 12, decided to take advantage of the brief intermission to stretch her legs. She rose gracefully and made her way toward a small alcove near the terrace doors, seeking a moment of quiet before the evening's main event. The alcove, partially concealed by an enormous floral arrangement, offered a brief respite from the watchful eyes that had been monitoring her all evening. Meryl took a deep breath, adjusting her simple pearl earrings, a gift from her daughter, and mentally prepared for whatever the remainder of the night might bring. "Victoria is becoming absolutely unhinged about this," came Diana's voice from just around the corner, hidden from Meryl's view by the massive arrangement of orchids and lilies. Meryl froze, not out of fear but curiosity. She hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but Diana's next words rooted her to the spot. "She's convinced Robert is planning something that will undermine her position," Diana continued, apparently speaking to someone on her phone. "She's managed to change the program order, but she's still paranoid about Meryl Streep of all people." Meryl remained perfectly still, her breathing quiet and measured. "I know it's ridiculous," Diana continued after a pause, "but Victoria insists Meryl wasn't supposed to be at that back table. Apparently Robert had her on the original seating chart at table 1, right next to him." Another pause. "No, Victoria doesn't know why. That's what has her climbing the walls. Robert's been trying to reach Meryl all night, and Victoria's run interference at every turn." Meryl's curiosity deepened. She had assumed Robert's attempts to approach her were simply friendly courtesy, but this suggested something more deliberate. "The big donor announcement is supposed to come at the end of the program," Diana continued, lowering her voice further. "Victoria thinks Robert is planning to publicly recognize Meryl for something. She's determined to make sure whatever it is happens, after half the guests have already left for their next events." Meryl's eyes widened slightly. Robert had promised her anonymity for years. Had he decided it was finally time to reveal her role? "Between us," Diana whispered, Victoria told the technical director to cut the microphone if Robert goes off script. During his remarks, can you imagine? The person on the other end of the call apparently expressed shock, as Diana quickly added, "I know. She's gone too far this time. Even for Victoria, this is... Wait. I think the program's starting. I need to get back." As Diana's footsteps faded, Meryl remained in the alcove processing this new information. For 15 years, she had been the anonymous benefactor behind the Foundation's largest endowment. When Robert had called her 3 weeks ago, he had hinted it might be time to go public, not for recognition but to inspire others to give similarly. "The right example at the right moment can change everything," he had said. Meryl had reluctantly agreed, on the condition that the focus remain on the Foundation's work rather than her personal contribution. Now it seemed Victoria Hamilton was determined to undermine even this modest acknowledgement. As Meryl contemplated her next move, she caught sight of Emma Thompson making her way determinedly toward the alcove. "There you are," Emma said quietly, joining Meryl in the secluded space. "Robert's been trying to reach you all night." "So I've gathered," Meryl replied with a small smile. "Victoria's been quite thorough in preventing it." Emma rolled her eyes. "That woman is a menace, always has been. But this is different. She's actively sabotaging the Foundation's biggest night of the year because of some bizarre social competition. Only she's playing. I just overheard Diana," Meryl confided. "Apparently Victoria has manipulated the program order and instructed the technical team to cut Robert's microphone if he goes off script." Emma's eyebrows shot up. "She wouldn't dare." "I think we both know she would," Meryl replied calmly. Emma's expression hardened. "Well, we can't let her get away with it. Robert specifically restructured this entire event around the revelation of your contribution. It's meant to launch the new scholarship program." Meryl sighed softly. "I never wanted public recognition, Emma. You know that." "This isn't about recognition," Emma insisted. "It's about impact. Robert believes, and I agree, that revealing your 15 years of anonymous support will inspire others to give similarly. It's about changing the culture of philanthropy from performative to purposeful." Before Meryl could respond, they were interrupted by Marcus, who approached with urgent purpose. "Ms. Streep, Ms. Thompson," he whispered. "Mr. De Niro asked me to find you both. He's waiting in the small library off the east hallway. He says it's urgent." Emma glanced at her watch. "The program starts in 10 minutes. We need to hurry." Meryl hesitated. "Victoria's watching my every move. If I head toward Robert now, she'll intervene." Emma's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Leave Victoria to me. I've been waiting all night for an excuse to put that woman in her place." As Emma swept back into the ballroom with dramatic purpose, Meryl slipped quietly along the perimeter of the room, following Marcus toward the east hallway. From the corner of her eye, she caught sight of Emma deliberately spilling champagne on Victoria's gold gown, creating precisely the distraction they needed. The small library was dim and quiet, a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom. Robert De Niro stood by a shelf of leather-bound books, his expression a mixture of frustration and resolve. "Meryl," he said with evident relief, "finally. I've been trying to reach you all night. Victoria has been quite determined to keep us apart." Meryl observed with gentle humor. Robert's expression darkened. "She's undermined this entire event, changed the seating chart, spread rumors, and now she's rearranged the program without authorization." "I heard," Meryl replied. "Diana mentioned something about cutting your microphone?" Robert nodded grimly. "Victoria doesn't know what's coming, but she suspects enough to be afraid. She's built her entire social identity around being the Foundation's most significant supporter. And tonight, that illusion ends," Meryl concluded. "Only if you're still willing," Robert said, his tone softening. "I know this was never about recognition for you, Meryl, but your example could transform how our entire community approaches giving." Meryl considered this quietly. For 15 years, she had contributed anonymously to educational initiatives through Robert's Foundation. Her gifts had funded scholarships for thousands of students, built libraries in underserved communities, and established teacher training programs across the country. All without a single press release or photo opportunity. Victoria has spent years using this foundation as a social weapon, Robert continued, making donors feel small if they can't match her contributions, treating the cause like her personal status symbol, while ensuring everyone knows exactly how much she gives, Meryl added. Robert nodded. "Exactly. Your approach has been the opposite. Maximum impact, minimum ego. That's the example we need right now." The sound of the ballroom. Lights dimming filtered through the closed door. "The program was beginning. Victoria thinks she's won," Robert said. "She's moved my presentation to the very end, when half the room will have left for other engagements." "What's your plan?" Meryl asked. A slow smile spread across Robert's face. "Sometimes the best way to handle people like Victoria is to let them think they've won, right until the moment they realize they've lost." As the three of them prepared to return to the ballroom, Emma Thompson slipped into the library, slightly breathless. "Victoria is absolutely livid about her dress," she reported with undisguised satisfaction. "She's in the ladies' room trying." to salvage that monstrosity of a gown. Perfect timing, Robert said. The Foundation president is making opening remarks, which gives us about 10 minutes. Meryl took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what was to come. After 15 years of anonymous giving, she was about to be thrust into the spotlight, not for her acting achievements but for her quiet philanthropy. "Are you ready for this?" Robert asked gently. Meryl smiled, her quiet confidence restored. "I've faced worse than Victoria Hamilton on a film set, Robert. Much worse." As they made their way back toward the ballroom, Meryl caught sight of Victoria, emerging from the ladies' room, a visible champagne stain on her golden gown despite her best efforts to clean it. Their eyes met briefly across the hallway, Victoria's narrowing with suspicion, Meryl's calmly observant. The night's true performance was about to begin, and for once Victoria Hamilton hadn't seen the script. Meryl slipped back into the ballroom and quietly returned to table 12 as the Foundation president, Dr. Elaine Montgomery, concluded her opening remarks. The technical crew had dimmed the chandeliers, focusing attention on the stage where a projection screen displayed images of children benefiting from the Foundation's programs. Victoria, having returned from the ladies' room with a noticeable champagne stain on her gold gown, scanned the room with hawk-like intensity. When she spotted Meryl back at her isolated table, her shoulders visibly relaxed. Whatever Meryl had been doing during her absence, Victoria seemed satisfied it hadn't disrupted her careful orchestration of the evening. "Thank you, Dr. Montgomery, for that inspiring overview of our work," the MC announced. "Next, we'll hear from Victoria Hamilton, who will introduce our major benefactors for the coming year." Victoria's triumphant smile as she took the stage confirmed what Meryl had overheard. She had successfully rearranged the program, pushing Robert's segment to the end of the evening. "Distinguished guests," Victoria began, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone used to commanding attention. "Tonight represents the culmination of another extraordinary year of impact for the Education First Foundation." She paused, surveying the room with the air of someone who believed herself to be its most important occupant. "As chair of the Donor Relations Committee, I've had the privilege of working closely with those who make our mission possible through their exceptional generosity." From her seat, Meryl noticed Robert slipping out a side door, followed discreetly by Emma Thompson. Marcus, the young waiter, was now stationed near the technical booth, having apparently been reassigned from serving duties. "While many contribute to our cause," Victoria continued, "tonight I want to recognize our Platinum Circle, those whose contributions exceed $1 million annually." On cue, the screen behind her displayed a list of names, with Victoria and Richard Hamilton prominently featured at the top. "The Hamilton Family Foundation is proud to have contributed $2 million this year," Victoria announced, pausing for the appreciative murmurs that followed. "Each member of our Platinum Circle deserves recognition for their commitment to educational excellence." As Victoria began reading the names, Meryl observed Diana watching the side door through which Robert and Emma had disappeared, anxiety evident in her posture. Whatever was happening behind the scenes had clearly caught Diana's attention. Victoria's voice faltered slightly as she noticed Diana's distracted expression. "And of course, the Morgan Family Trust, with their generous—" She trailed off as the lights in the ballroom unexpectedly dimmed further, and the presentation screen behind her changed without warning. I apologize for the technical difficulty," Victoria stammered, turning to look at the screen, which now displayed the Foundation's logo rather than the donor list. The MC approached the podium, gently but firmly guiding Victoria aside. "Thank you, Miss Hamilton, for that introduction to our generous supporters. We have a slight change to our program this evening." Victoria's expression froze in a rictus of a smile, shock evident in her eyes, as she whispered urgently to the MC, who simply smiled apologetically and gestured toward the wings of the stage. Robert De Niro emerged to enthusiastic applause, his presence commanding immediate respect. Victoria had no choice but to step back, though her expression made clear this deviation wasn't part of her plan. "Good evening, everyone," Robert began, his voice warm but authoritative. "Before we continue with our donor recognitions, I'd like to take a moment to share something special with all of you." Victoria, now standing awkwardly at the edge of the stage, looked toward the technical booth with clear panic in her eyes. The technician she had instructed to cut the microphone merely shrugged helplessly as Marcus stood beside him, smiling slightly. "For 15 years, Robert continued, this foundation has been blessed with an extraordinary benefactor, someone whose generosity has funded our scholarship program, built libraries in underserved communities, and established teacher training initiatives in 27 states." The ballroom grew utterly silent, all attention focused on Robert's words. This person has never sought recognition. In fact, they specifically requested anonymity, believing that true charity requires no audience. Victoria's expression shifted, from panic to confusion, then to dawning horror as she began to understand where this was heading. "Tonight, with her reluctant permission," Robert said, his gaze sweeping the room, "I want to acknowledge the single largest contributor in our foundation's history, a person who has given not just resources but time, wisdom, and genuine care to our mission." Diana was now frantically texting on her phone, her composure entirely abandoned as she watched her friend's carefully constructed social hierarchy teeter on the edge of collapse. "For the past 15 years, Robert said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, Meryl Streep has anonymously donated over $50 million to educational initiatives through our foundation." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom as all eyes turned to table 12, where Meryl sat in her simple, navy dress, pearl earrings catching the subdued light. "Not for recognition," Robert continued as the screen behind him displayed images of libraries, classrooms, and scholarship recipients, "not for social standing, but because she believes, as I do, that education transforms lives in ways nothing else can." Victoria stood frozen at the edge of the stage, the champagne stain on her gold gown now the least of her concerns as her carefully constructed narrative imploded in real time. Robert gestured toward table 12. "Meryl, would you please join me?" As Meryl rose and made her way toward the stage, the room erupted in spontaneous applause. The guests at the front tables, those who had been carefully cultivated by Victoria as the evening's most important, looked thunderstruck at the revelation. Emma Thompson, who had reappeared at a side entrance, caught Meryl's eye and offered an encouraging smile as she passed. Victoria, still paralyzed at the edge of the stage, struggled to maintain her composure as Meryl approached. Their eyes met briefly. Victoria's, filled with shock and humiliation, Meryl's calm and without a trace of triumph or malice. "For those who don't know the full story," Robert continued as Meryl joined him at the podium, "Meryl's contributions have been made with one consistent stipulation, that the foundation focus on results rather than recognition. She has attended our events not as a major donor seeking attention, but as a genuine supporter interested in the work itself." The contrast with Victoria's approach to philanthropy hung unspoken but unmistakable in the air. "Meryl," Robert said, turning to her, "would you share a few words about why education matters to you?" As Meryl stepped to the microphone, she noticed Victoria finally finding the presence of mind to slip off the stage, retreating to her table where Diana waited, ashen-faced. "Thank you, Robert," Meryl began, her voice measured and sincere. "But tonight isn't about me or any individual donor. It's about the transformative power of education." She paused, allowing her gaze to travel across the room, briefly meeting Victoria's stunned expression. "True philanthropy isn't measured by recognition, table placements, or social position," she continued. "It's measured by impact, by the lives changed, the potential unleashed, the futures brightened." The room hung on her every word, the earlier social hierarchies utterly dissolved by this revelation. "I've been fortunate in my life and career," Meryl said with characteristic humility. "Sharing that good fortune meaningfully has been both a privilege and a responsibility." At table 1, Victoria sat rigid with shock. The social currency she had traded in all evening suddenly devalued to nothing. The woman she had deliberately isolated and humiliated had for 15 years been the very heart of the foundation Victoria had used as her social stepping stone. As Meryl concluded her brief remarks, the ballroom erupted in standing applause. genuine, admiration replacing the calculated social positioning that had dominated the evening until now. The turning point was complete, and as Victoria Hamilton sat amid the rising ovation, still in her stained golden gown, she finally understood just how thoroughly she had misjudged not just Meryl Streep, but the entire room. The standing ovation continued for nearly a full minute, a genuine outpouring of admiration, rather than the perfunctory applause that typically accompanied donor recognitions. As Meryl stood beside Robert on stage, she felt a curious mixture of discomfort at the attention and satisfaction that the Foundation's work was being celebrated so enthusiastically. When the applause finally subsided, Robert continued the presentation, now showing detailed images of the programs Meryl's contributions had made possible. Libraries in rural communities, scholarship recipients who had gone on to become doctors and teachers, arts programs in underfunded schools. Each slide revealed another facet of the quiet impact she had facilitated over 15 years. These aren't just statistics or photo opportunities, Robert explained, his genuine passion evident. These are transformed lives, real children with real futures that look dramatically different because of sustained, thoughtful, philanthropic commitment. From her position on stage, Meryl could see the entire ballroom clearly for the first time that evening. The social geography had shifted dramatically in the past 5 minutes. Victoria and Diana sat rigid at table 1, their earlier confidence evaporated. Around them, the carefully curated elite of New York society appeared unsure how to respond, their allegiances visibly recalculating in real time. More interesting to Meryl were the reactions of guests at the middle and back tables, the ones Victoria had deemed less important. Their expressions showed genuine engagement with the presentation, several wiping away tears, as Robert detailed the stories of children whose lives had been changed. "And tonight," Robert announced, "we're launching our most ambitious initiative yet, a $50 million endowment to establish permanent scholarship funds in every state. This endowment, which will bear no donor's name by specific request, will ensure that financial barriers never prevent talented students from achieving their potential." The screen displayed the simple name, the Possibility Fund. "The initial funding for this endowment," Robert continued, "has been provided through a $25 million matching grant. Every dollar donated to this fund over the next year will be matched 1-to-1. Another wave of appreciative murmurs swept through the room. Philanthropic matching grants of this size were rare and powerful motivators for additional giving. "Meryl," Robert said, turning to her with genuine warmth, "would you like to share more about your vision for this fund?" Taking the microphone. Again, Meryl spoke with quiet conviction. "Education changed my life. Not just formal training as an actor, but the broader education that exposed me to literature, history, different perspectives and possibilities. Every child deserves that expansion of horizon, that sense that the world is full of doors waiting to be opened." She paused, then continued with greater intensity. "But these opportunities aren't distributed equally. Too many doors remain locked for children born into challenging circumstances. The Possibility Fund isn't about charity, it's about justice, about ensuring that potential isn't wasted simply because of a zip code or family income." As she spoke, Meryl noticed Emma Thompson, nodding emphatically from her table. Beyond her, even some of Victoria's social circle appeared moved, perhaps hearing authentic passion for a cause for the first time that evening. "I never wanted my name attached to this work," Meryl continued, "but Robert convinced me that sometimes visibility matters, not for ego but for example. If my involvement inspires others to give meaningfully rather than performatively, then this unexpected recognition serves a purpose beyond my personal comfort." The irony of her words wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed Victoria's earlier behavior. Several glances shifted toward table 1, where Victoria sat with a frozen smile, the champagne stain on her dress now a perfect visual metaphor for her tarnished social standing. As Meryl concluded her remarks, the Foundation's executive director joined her and Robert on stage with a surprise announcement. "In recognition of Meryl Streep's unparalleled contribution to educational equity," she began, "the Board of Directors has unanimously voted to name our headquarters the Streep Center for educational opportunity. A simple rendering appeared on screen. The Foundation's historic building with a tasteful plaque bearing the new name. It was exactly the kind of recognition Meryl had always avoided, and her momentary discomfort was visible before she managed a gracious smile. Robert, sensing her hesitation, leaned toward the microphone. "Meryl tried to talk us out of this for 3 weeks," he explained with a knowing smile. "She only relented when we agreed that the building would feature the stories of students, not donors, in its public spaces." This garnered warm laughter from the audience, who were beginning to understand the stark difference between Meryl's approach to philanthropy and the social performance they had witnessed from others throughout the evening. As the presentation concluded, guests were invited to visit displays around the ballroom showcasing the Foundation's work. Meryl and Robert descended from the stage to find the social dynamics of the room dramatically transformed. People who had ignored or avoided Meryl earlier now formed an eager line to speak with her. More telling was how they approached, not with the fawning admiration typically directed at celebrities, but with thoughtful questions about specific programs and genuine interest in the work itself. Emma Thompson appeared at Meryl's side, offering a glass of water and a moment of friendly support. "Well, that was certainly worth the price of admission," she murmured. "Victoria Hamilton looks like she swallowed her own jewelry." Meryl smiled but shook her head slightly. "Tonight isn't about Victoria." "Of course not," Emma agreed, "but I can't help enjoying the poetic justice just a little." Across the room, Victoria and Diana huddled in intense conversation, their expressions shifting between shock, anger, and calculation as they attempted to process their new reality. The Connollys, the couple who had briefly joined Meryl at table 12 before being redirected, approached with warm smiles. "We had no idea," Elizabeth Connolly said, taking Meryl's hand. "Though it makes perfect sense now." Richard nodded in agreement. "Our small foundation has been the recipient of 3 grants from the literacy initiative you funded. We've taught over 2,000 adults to read because of your support." Meryl's eyes brightened with genuine interest. "That's remarkable work. I'd love to hear more about your approach." As they fell into an earnest conversation about literacy methodologies, Meryl noticed Victoria finally rising from her seat, clearly preparing to leave the event early. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Victoria's filled with humiliation, Meryl's with simple acknowledgement. To Meryl's surprise, however, Victoria changed course and began making her way toward her. Diana attempted to intervene, tugging at Victoria's arm but was firmly rebuffed. Robert, noticing this development, moved protectively closer to Meryl. "You don't have to engage with her," he said quietly. "It's all right," Meryl assured him. As Victoria approached, the guests around Meryl fell silent, sensing the dramatic confrontation unfolding. Victoria's gold gown, still bearing the champagne, stain seemed garish now rather than impressive, a costume rather than elegant attire. "Meryl," Victoria said, her voice tight but controlled. "I believe congratulations are in order." The entire room seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how this unexpected encounter would unfold. After an evening of subtle and not so subtle humiliations orchestrated by Victoria, the power dynamic had been completely reversed. What remained to be seen was whether Victoria would attempt to salvage her dignity or make matters worse. And in that tense moment, Meryl Streep faced a choice of her own: how to respond to the woman who had spent the entire evening attempting to diminish her. The ballroom had fallen into a hush as Victoria Hamilton stood before Meryl, the champagne stain on her gold gown a visual testament to her diminished stature. The carefully cultivated image of social superiority she had projected all evening had crumbled, leaving behind a woman struggling to maintain the last vestiges of her dignity. "Meryl," Victoria repeated, her voice slightly more controlled now. "Your contribution to the Foundation is, impressive. I had no idea you were involved at this level." "Thank you, Victoria," Meryl replied simply, neither cold nor particularly warm, just present and attentive. Victoria shifted uncomfortably under the collective gaze of the onlookers. "Had I known, of course, the evening would have unfolded quite differently." Emma Thompson, still at Meryl's side, made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Robert maintained a neutral expression. though the slight tightening around his eyes suggested he was less forgiving than Meryl. "I'm sure it would have," Meryl acknowledged, offering nothing more. The silence stretched between them, growing increasingly uncomfortable for Victoria, while Meryl remained completely at ease. It was a masterclass in patience, the kind developed through decades of waiting on film sets and in theatre wings. Finally, Victoria attempted to reclaim some semblance of control. "Perhaps we should discuss a collaboration between our foundations. The Hamilton Foundation would be an excellent partner for some of these initiatives." Robert subtly shook his head, recognizing the transparent attempt to attach herself to Meryl's now revealed prestige. "That's not necessary," Meryl responded gently. "The foundation has excellent leadership already. My role is simply to provide resources where they're needed." Victoria's smile tightened further. "Of course, I just thought, given your inexperience with public philanthropy, you might appreciate guidance from those of us who have been more visible in this space." A few gasps emanated from those close enough to hear this remarkably tone-deaf statement. Even Diana, hovering anxiously behind Victoria, closed her eyes briefly in pained recognition of her friend's social miscalculation. Meryl studied Victoria for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than offended. When she finally spoke, her voice was low enough that people leaned in to hear. "Victoria, I've spent 15 years learning about educational equity from teachers, administrators, parents, and students. I've visited programs in rural Appalachia, urban Detroit, and everywhere in between. I've read research, attended board meetings, and evaluated outcomes." She paused, allowing her words to settle. "My philanthropic work hasn't been public, but it has been thorough. The guidance I need comes from those doing the work, not those talking about the work." The words landed with precision, firm, but not cruel. Victoria's face flushed, the color rising to clash with her gold dress. Emma Thompson, no longer able to contain herself, added, "Besides, Victoria, visibility doesn't seem to be working out particularly well for you this evening, does it?" Robert shot Emma a warning glance, which she acknowledged with a small shrug but no apology. Victoria's composure finally cracked. "This entire evening has been a setup," she hissed, her voice rising slightly. "You let me believe, you encouraged everyone to believe that you were just a fading actress attending out of desperation or obligation." "I never claimed to be anything, Victoria," Meryl replied calmly. "You made those assumptions entirely on your own." "You could have said something when I had you moved to table 12, Victoria insisted, her indignation growing. "Why would I?" Meryl asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. "Table assignments don't matter to me. I was there for the cause, not the seating chart." Victoria struggled visibly with this concept, the idea that someone might truly not care about the social hierarchies she had spent decades navigating and manipulating. "You humiliated me deliberately," she finally accused, her voice carrying enough to draw even more attention from surrounding guests. Robert stepped forward, his patience exhausted. "Victoria, the only person responsible for any humiliation tonight is you. Your behavior has been appalling from the moment Meryl arrived." "Robert, please," Meryl said quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. She turned back to Victoria, her expression neither angry nor triumphant but reflective. "You know, Victoria, when you had me moved to that back table, I actually enjoyed watching the evening unfold from there. It was illuminating to see who was performing charity and who was genuinely engaged with the cause." She glanced around the room, taking in the mix of uncomfortable and fascinated faces. "This foundation exists to create educational opportunities for children who might otherwise be overlooked or underestimated. Tonight was supposed to celebrate that mission. Instead, it became a stage for the same kind of exclusionary behavior those children face every day." Victoria flinched as the parallel became clear. "The irony," Meryl continued softly, "is that you've inadvertently created a powerful teaching moment. Everyone in this room has now witnessed both approaches to philanthropy, one that centers status and visibility, and one that centers impact and purpose." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering crowd. Victoria stood frozen, the full weight of the public repudiation settling over her. Diana, finally finding her courage, stepped forward. "Victoria, we should go," she urged quietly. But Victoria remained rooted to the spot, her social instincts finally failing her completely. "You think you're better than me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Meryl shook her head. "No, Victoria. I think we've simply been measuring success by different metrics." The simplicity of the statement, delivered without malice or superiority, seemed to finally penetrate Victoria's armor. For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in years, Victoria Hamilton looked genuinely uncertain. "I've supported this foundation for a decade," she said, a note of desperation entering her voice, "and that support has made a difference," Meryl acknowledged. "Every contribution matters, Victoria. It's never been a competition." Victoria stared at her, seemingly unable to process the absence of the social combat she had been engaged in all evening. "Then why reveal your involvement tonight?" she finally asked. "Why not maintain your anonymity?" It was Robert who answered. "Because philanthropy in this city has become too much about social status and not enough about sustainable impact. We needed someone with unimpeachable credibility to demonstrate another way." The truth hung in the air between them. Victoria had not been the target of the evening's revelation, but her behavior had made her its most dramatic casualty. Diana tugged more firmly at Victoria's arm. "Victoria, please." This time, Victoria allowed herself to be led away, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The crowd parted silently to let them pass. The social queen's exile witnessed by the very people she had spent years impressing and intimidating. As Victoria reached the ballroom doors, she paused and looked back one final time. The scene she observed must have been bitter indeed. Meryl, now surrounded by engaged and attentive guests, listening intently as a young scholarship recipient explained his research project. In that moment, the contrast could not have been clearer. Victoria departing in humiliation while Meryl remained, focused not on her triumph, but on the foundation's work. The doors swung shut behind Victoria and Diana, and a collective breath seemed to release throughout the ballroom. The confrontation was over. Emma Thompson leaned close to Meryl. "That was masterful," she whispered. "You gave her every opportunity to salvage her dignity." "Everyone deserves that chance," Meryl replied simply. Robert squeezed her shoulder gratefully. "And now perhaps we can finally focus on what tonight was supposed to be about." Meryl nodded, turning her full attention to the young scholarship student who had been patiently waiting. "You were telling me about your research," she prompted. As the young man resumed his explanation, Meryl listened with genuine interest, embodying the principles she had just described to Victoria, that true philanthropy was never about the giver, but always about the impact. The remainder of the evening unfolded with a distinctly different energy. Victoria's departure had released a tension that had pervaded the ballroom all night, allowing the event to finally become what it was meant to be, a celebration of educational opportunity. Guests moved freely between tables now, the invisible. Social barriers dissolved. Conversation focused increasingly on the foundation's work rather than social positioning. Even those who had been firmly in Victoria's orbit earlier seemed relieved to abandon the exhausting performance of status-conscious philanthropy. Meryl remained at the center of much attention, but the nature of the interactions had fundamentally changed. Rather than the celebrity worship Victoria had feared would overshadow her own importance, guests approached Meryl with thoughtful questions about specific programs and genuine interest in her perspective on educational equity. "You've completely transformed this room," Robert observed as they moved between display stations showcasing student achievements. "I've been hosting this gala for 12 years, and I've never seen conversations this substantive." The morning after the gala dawned bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the windows of Meryl's Manhattan apartment. She sat at her kitchen table, coffee in hand, browsing through the education section of the New York Times. No mention yet of last night's events, the revelation of her long anonymous philanthropy, or Victoria Hamilton's social downfall. Such news rarely made headlines outside the insular world of New York society. Her phone chimed with a message from Robert. "Donations still coming in, $18 million total now. Breakfast tomorrow to discuss next steps?" Meryl smiled and replied her agreement. The number was significant, nearly triple what the gala typically raised, but more important was the shift she had witnessed in how people engaged with the cause. True philanthropy wasn't measured in dollars alone, but in meaningful commitment to change. A second message arrived, this one from Emma Thompson. Have you seen page 6 yet? Victoria's social obituary is quite something. Meryl hadn't checked and didn't intend to. Whatever the society pages made of last night's drama held little interest for her. Victoria's humiliation had never been her goal, merely an unfortunate consequence of the woman's own behavior. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her morning routine. The doorman announced an unexpected visitor, Diana Blackwood. Meryl hesitated only briefly before inviting her up. When Diana entered, she looked noticeably different from the previous evening, dressed in simple slacks and a sweater rather than designer couture, her face bearing less makeup and more vulnerability. I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced, Diana began, declining Meryl's offer of coffee. I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation last night. Please sit, Meryl invited, gesturing to her modestly furnished living room, comfortable and elegant without ostentation. Diana perched on the edge of the sofa, clearly still finding her footing in this new dynamic between them. I spoke with Victoria this morning, she said directly. She's not handling things well. I'm sorry to hear that, Meryl replied sincerely. Diana looked surprised by the genuine concern. Are you, after how she treated you? Meryl considered this. Social humiliation is painful, regardless of whether it's deserved. I take no pleasure in her distress, even if her behavior created the situation. That's remarkably gracious, Diana observed. Victoria isn't being nearly so magnanimous. She's already planning how to reposition herself socially and undermine your influence. Meryl smiled slightly. She's welcome to try. My work with the foundation isn't about social influence. I know that now, Diana acknowledged. That's partly why I'm here. She took a deep breath. After speaking with Victoria this morning, I realized I need to make a choice about who I want to be in this world. Meryl waited patiently as Diana gathered her thoughts. For 20 years I've followed Victoria's lead in everything. How to dress, who to befriend, which causes to support, Diana continued. But meeting those scholarship students last night, hearing their stories, it made me realize how shallow my engagement has been. It's never too late to change course, Meryl offered gently. Diana nodded, a new resolve visible in her expression. I've told Victoria I won't be participating in her campaign to rehabilitate her social standing. Instead, I've asked Sophia Chen if I could volunteer with the literacy program. The transformation seemed almost too sudden to be credible, but Meryl recognized the catalyzing effect of moments like last night. Sometimes, a single evening could indeed shift a person's perspective permanently. That's commendable, Meryl said. The program can always use dedicated volunteers. I have no illusions that one conversation has erased my years of superficial philanthropy, Diana added, showing more self-awareness than Meryl had expected. But I have to start somewhere. Their conversation was interrupted by Meryl's phone, ringing, Robert De Niro calling rather than texting, which suggested urgency. Meryl, he said when she answered, have you seen the Times website? They've picked up the story. After concluding the call, Meryl opened her laptop to find that the events of the previous evening had indeed transcended the society pages, the farce. New York Times had published an in-depth piece titled The Quiet Philanthropist, Meryl Streep's 15-Year Secret. The article detailed her long history of anonymous giving, the remarkable impact of her focused educational philanthropy, and the dramatic revelation at the previous night's gala. It positioned her approach as a potential model for a new era of philanthropy, one focused on sustained impact rather than social recognition. Diana read the article over Meryl's shoulder, her expression thoughtful. This is going to change things, isn't it? Not just for Victoria, but for how philanthropy works in this city. Perhaps, Meryl acknowledged, though change usually comes more slowly than we expect. Not always, Diana countered, gesturing to herself with a small smile. Sometimes it happens overnight. As Diana prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. I should warn you. Victoria still has considerable influence in certain circles. She won't take last night's humiliation lying down. Meryl nodded, unsurprised. I've never been overly concerned with social positioning, Diana. That gives me a certain freedom Victoria doesn't have. I'm beginning to understand that, Diana replied. Thank you, not just for your graciousness toward me, but for showing that there's another way to engage with philanthropy, with the world, really. After Diana's departure, Meryl returned to her coffee and the morning sun streaming through her windows. Her phone continued chiming with messages, journalists seeking comments, fellow philanthropists expressing admiration, foundation board members sharing updates on the continuing donation surge. Later that afternoon, Meryl visited one of the foundation's community libraries in Harlem, a space transformed by her funding from a cramped, outdated facility to a vibrant learning center. She had been here many times before, always as an anonymous supporter rather than a recognized benefactor. The director greeted her with the same warm familiarity as always, but with a new understanding of her role. The kids are buzzing about the news, she confided as she walked Meryl through the busy main reading room. They can't believe their library was funded by Meryl Streep. Children looked up from books and computer stations, whispering excitedly as she passed. One brave young girl approached with a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. Miss Streep, would you read with me? Miss Jackson says you're the reason we have so many books. Meryl smiled and sat down beside her. I'd love to read with you, and the books are here because you deserve them. As she read aloud to an increasingly large circle of children, Meryl reflected on the unexpected turns of the past 24 hours. Her carefully maintained anonymity had ended, bringing both welcome and unwelcome attention. Victoria Hamilton had suffered a social downfall of her own making. Diana Blackwood had begun what appeared to be a genuine journey of transformation. But here, in this library filled with curious minds and boundless potential, was the only reality. That truly mattered, the tangible impact of educational opportunity on young lives. That evening, Robert and Emma joined Meryl for dinner at her apartment, the three of them celebrating the unexpected success of the Gala far from the public. To record-breaking donations, Robert toasted, and to Victoria Hamilton's spectacular comeuppance, Emma added with a mischievous smile. Meryl shook her head, raising her glass with a different sentiment. To purposeful giving and the children who benefit. As they enjoyed their meal and conversation, Meryl shared Diana's surprising visit and apparent transformation. I'm skeptical, Emma admitted. 20 years of social climbing doesn't vanish overnight. Perhaps not, Meryl acknowledged. But genuine change always begins somewhere. Diana deserves the chance to prove her sincerity, Robert nodded thoughtfully. The foundation could certainly use more volunteers who understand the social landscape we're trying to change. As the evening concluded and Meryl bid her friends goodbye, she found herself reflecting on the strange symmetry of the past 2 days. Victoria had tried to humiliate her through isolation and exclusion, tactics often used against the very children the foundation sought to help. Instead, that attempt had revealed the hollowness of social status compared to genuine impact. Her phone chimed with one final message for the day, a photo from Sophia Chen showing Diana Blackwood, dressed in casual clothes, shelving books alongside. Teenagers at the Queen's Community Library. Meryl smiled at the image. The most meaningful resolutions often came not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet moments of choice. The decision to value substance over appearance, impact over recognition, inclusion over exclusion. Victoria Hamilton might never learn that lesson, but others had. And in the end, that was victory enough. If you enjoyed this story about authentic values triumphing over superficial appearances, click to watch more inspiring celebrity tales that will warm your heart and restore your faith in humanity. I think Victoria did most of the transformation, Meryl replied with a wry smile. Sometimes you need to see the wrong approach clearly to recognize the right one. Emma Thompson joined them, champagne glass in hand. Victoria's departure has been the social equivalent of opening windows in a stuffy room. Even her closest allies are suddenly behaving like actual human beings. She nodded toward a cluster of impeccably dressed women who had spent most of the evening orbiting Victoria. They were now engaged in animated conversation with the Foundation's education director, appearing genuinely interested in the methodologies behind the literacy program. People often default to following the established social pattern, Meryl observed. Victoria created one pattern. Perhaps tonight we've offered an alternative. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Speaking of alternatives, there's someone I'd like you to meet. He guided Meryl toward a quiet corner, where a woman in a simple but elegant black dress waited. This is Sophia Chen, our new program director for the Possibility Fund. She'll be overseeing the national expansion. Sophia, a woman in her early 40s with a calm, intelligent presence, extended her hand. Miss Streep, it's an honor. Your approach to philanthropy has been an inspiration to many of us working behind the scenes. Please call me Meryl, she replied warmly. Robert speaks very highly of your work in educational policy. That's actually why I wanted to introduce you. Too, Robert explained. Sophia has developed a model for scaling our most successful programs nationally, but we've been hesitant to move forward without the right guidance. My approach combines targeted intervention with systemic advocacy, Sophia explained. We can provide immediate resources to students while simultaneously addressing the policies that create inequity in the first place. Meryl listened attentively as Sophia outlined her vision, asking thoughtful questions that revealed her deep understanding of the challenges facing educational reform. It was exactly the kind of substantive conversation that rarely occurred at fundraising galas, but that actually moved missions forward. Across the room, Diana Blackwood had returned alone. She stood uncertainly at the edge of the ballroom, looking smaller and less confident without Victoria beside her. After a moment's hesitation, she approached Emma Thompson, who watched her approach with undisguised skepticism. Ms. Thompson, Diana began awkwardly, I wanted to apologize for my role in tonight's unpleasantness. Emma raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing for your conscience to awaken. Diana flushed. I deserve that, but I also wanted to ask if you think Meryl would be willing to speak with me briefly. That's entirely her decision, Emma replied, neither encouraging nor preventing the request. Though I'm curious, where is Victoria now? She left, Diana admitted. She said she couldn't bear the humiliation and asked me to collect her things. But She hesitated. I felt I needed to come back. Emma studied her for a moment, then nodded slightly. Wait here. She made her way to where Meryl was still engaged in conversation with Sophia and Robert, quietly relaying Diana's request. Meryl glanced across the room at Diana's isolated figure and nodded without hesitation. Would you excuse me for a moment? She asked Sophia, who nodded understandingly. As Meryl approached, Diana visibly steeled herself, shoulders straightening with what appeared to be genuine resolve. Meryl, she began, her practiced socialite's voice giving way to something more authentic. I owe you an apology. My behavior tonight was inexcusable. Thank you for saying that, Meryl replied, her tone neither dismissive nor overly warm, just present and attentive. Diana seemed momentarily thrown by the simple acknowledgement. Victoria and I have been friends for 20 years, she continued, as if needing to explain. This social circle, these events, they've been my entire world, and tonight that world was disrupted, Meryl observed. Diana nodded, surprising herself with a small, sad laugh. Completely upended, but watching you speak about education, about opportunity, I realized how hollow it's all been. We've been using charity as a social weapon instead of as a tool for meaningful change, Meryl suggested gently. Exactly. Diana looked around the ballroom, seeing it with new eyes. All these years attending these events, and I've never once actually engaged with the work itself. It's been all about who sits where and who gives how much. She turned back to Meryl, something like wonder in her expression. How did you resist getting pulled into all that? The status games, the social positioning? It's like gravity in this world. Meryl considered the question thoughtfully. I think I've always been more interested in the substance than the appearance, in my work as an actor, and in my life beyond that. The external trappings, the awards, the recognition, the status, they're ephemeral. The impact is what endures. Diana absorbed this, nodding slowly. Victoria won't see it that way. For her, tonight was an unmitigated disaster. And for you, Meryl asked. For me, Diana said, surprising herself with her answer. It might have been a wake-up call I desperately needed. Before Meryl could respond, Marcus, the young waiter, appeared at her elbow. I'm sorry to interrupt, Miss Streep, but Mr. De Niro mentioned you wanted to meet some of the scholarship students before they leave. Yes, of course, Meryl replied, then turned back to Diana. Would you like to join us? Diana blinked in surprise. At the invitation? Yes, I would. Very much. As they walked together toward a group of bright-faced young students gathered near one of the displays, Diana added quietly, I don't deserve your graciousness after how I treated you. Perhaps not, Meryl acknowledged with a small smile. But growth rarely begins with getting what we deserve. Across the room, Emma watched this development with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant admiration. Do you think Diana's transformation is genuine? She asked Robert, who had joined her. I think tonight has sparked genuine reflection for many people, he replied diplomatically. Whether that reflection leads to lasting change remains to be seen. Emma raised her glass in acknowledgement. Well, if anyone could inspire such a change, it would be Meryl. As the evening drew to a close, guests began departing, many lingering to speak with Meryl or explore the exhibition displays they had ignored earlier. The energy remained positive and purposeful, with several guests making additional donation commitments before leaving. The Foundation's treasurer approached Robert with barely contained excitement. We've received over 12 million in new pledges tonight, he reported, more than double our most successful previous gala. Robert nodded, unsurprised. It turns out authentic engagement is good for the bottom line too. As the crowd thinned, Meryl finally had a moment to herself. She stood by one of the tall windows overlooking the city, reflecting on the evening's unexpected turns. What had begun as an exercise in social endurance had transformed into something genuinely meaningful. Emma joined her at the window. Quite a night, she observed, following Meryl's gaze out to the glittering cityscape. Indeed, Meryl agreed. Was it worth coming out of philanthropic anonymity? Emma asked. Meryl considered this. If it helps shift even a fraction of the wealth in this room toward more thoughtful giving, then yes. She turned from the window to look back at the now quiet ballroom, where Robert was engaged in animated conversation with Diana and several board members. Real change happens in small increments, often in unexpected moments. Perhaps tonight was one of those moments. And Victoria, Emma prompted. Meryl's expression turned reflective. Victoria may never change, but others watching. Her fall might think twice about following her example. The technical crew had begun breaking down the stage and display areas, signaling the definitive end of the evening. As Meryl and Emma prepared to depart, Robert approached with a warm smile. Thank you, he said simply. Not just for the donation, but for being willing to use your influence this way. Meryl nodded, accepting the gratitude with characteristic grace. What happens now? Now, Robert replied with quiet determination, we get back to the real work.